What's up, Rockstars, and welcome to my review for Forest of Radgost. Now, this is definitely a different style of game than I normally cover, but between the art style and the mystery of it all, I just had to get my hands on it, and now I'm ready to tell you my opinions on it. Now, as always, before I start out, I'd like to give a quick shout out and thank you to my YouTube members and patrons. It is through their financial support that I'm able to stay independent of the game developers. That way I can give you my honest opinion and not my wallet's opinion. So when I tell you if I like this game or not, it's not based off of how much money they paid me, because they paid me nothing. If you appreciate that and can support, there is a link down below in the description. But if not, a like on the video helps a lot. Even a comment saying that this was helpful in some way, shape, or form for you is, trust me, makes it all worthwhile. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk briefly about the gameplay. I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of how you play the game, how it's basically structured, that we have some context as I get into some of the pros and cons of the game. So, story-wise, there's kids that are lost. You form a search party. Your concept is to go into this forbidden forest to go and rescue the kids. The forest is a very old forest full of like Slavic mythological creatures, both physical and, non-physical, that will sometimes help you, sometimes harm you, sometimes hurt you, sometimes interact with you, or even communicate with you. And you'll be trying to essentially get through this forest by randomly drawing like a direction die. So you have this direction die that has a right, left, and a free movement, so you can decide which way to go or maybe not, and you kind of meander through the forest doing these interactions until eventually you meet up with the children. Once you do that, you group with the children and then have to make your way back to the forest. Everybody has to get back, by the way, before the game is considered finished, and you have 3 night cycles to be able to go through that, so 3 full days. Speaking of the night cycles, you have a kind of a counter here, and really it's not based off of turns, it's based off encounters or successful encounters. So to get to the nightfall, you have to have at least seven encounters that were successful. So you'll have stats in your running, hiding, fight, and communication. So will all of the enemies, or I guess mythological creatures, not all enemies. And you just do a basic skill chest based off that. And of course, you can modify it with items and cards and abilities and companions and other things that you do, or you can even group up to be stronger and stuff like that. Anyway, as you do that, then eventually gets into nightfall. Once nightfall happens, you introduce Radgost, the god himself. And so he will be in there, and now you can interact with him as well. Whether you want to or not, well, you'll have to find out. And then there's the night time as well before it goes back to it. In the nighttime, you actually stop moving. You're sleeping in the forest. You're having to spend the night in there. And the creatures are actually moving around and either interacting with each other or interacting with you. And there are different results depending on whether or not something is daytime or nighttime, both for success and failure. So definitely an interesting game in that sense. Now, there are some personal missions that you can add to there that do different things. I'll talk about them later, but suffice it to say, even after you rescue the children, you can still work on your personal missions before returning to the forest or the village. Once the kids are in the village, you no longer have to roll the die. You now kind of know your way around things, and so you can actually freely move around, which actually helps a lot completing those. That's really the kind of synopsis of it. You'll be getting a lot of cards. You'll be doing some searches. I'll be talking about various things, as we go through it, but, that's really it. And I guess we'll kind of dive into the pros and cons. All right. Now, the first thing I wanted to say, and this is definitely a positive here, is it is quick to set up. Now, it actually looks like a lot, but really it's very simple. You lay down the board, you lay down some tokens. Some of them are face up, some are face down. It's really easy. They're just numbered and they're all in like a string, which is nice. And then you just put all the minis over there. You got your bag, you got your character, you draw 3 cards here, you set all the other decks out. You're pretty much done. That's it. I mean, it just goes in within minutes. It's quick. I guess you got the counter here and all that, but after the first setup, it just you kind of realize, okay, here's where things go, and then you're just good to go. And you reset the forest throughout the game as you kind of go back into the day, and so with that, you get used to just distributing tokens anyway. And so the only kind of oddities are like when you first set up, there's some that like only go near water, but again, it's like 2, so it's not that bad. It goes actually really quick, especially considering some of the games I cover. This is one of the quickest to set up, which is really nice. The other thing I want to say about this is that it's actually a pretty quick playtime once you get into the groove of things. So, your first game is going to be maybe a little bit slow, and that's for a few reasons. First of all, everything is just new to you, right? So you're just reading everything. And there's a lot to read. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but like every time you encounter an enemy, there's like a whole thing where you can read about them. And of course, you're going to want to do that. So you learn about this, mythological creature versus this one, and which ones are good and bad, and how they appear, and how you deal with them, and what they do, and all that kind of stuff. And all that's kind of important thematically, because some of them even like play into your personal missions and stuff like that. And so it's very good to read that. But once you get into the groove of things, you're not going to read about a wolf a second time, right? You're just going to, compare your stats. You're going to move on. You're going to go, and you're going to know exactly what you're doing. You're going to get the items, know how those work. And so the gameplay can actually speed up pretty rapidly. Like I remember in my unboxing, I was worried because I saw that like 90-minute thing. But it plays quick. It can take longer. And that's really, again, like I said, after you get the kids to the village, you can go to the village and be done, or you can still work on your personal missions. And that's where I think some of the time can go, because those are kind of hard and difficult to do at times. And I'll talk more about them specifically later as well. So, that's definitely, something. And really, I want to now divvy up to another positive, which is how lore heavy it is. I talked about reading some stuff here, and like, so you have this kind of a book of encounters, and every single even the intro too, it's like in character, right? But then, you read about a wraith, and here's everything about a wraith. And then each thing that can happen has a bit of story to it, and it all kind of makes sense and, adds different things. And it might tell you to, do one thing or another, which then leads to a card. And it gets to the point where like, even like this deck here is really cool. So if you could get captured and picked up by a giant, and there's a whole set of cards about that, about how it affects your movement, how you're just kind of moving around, and you just walk through things, and then eventually you can find yourself in this cave, and you can interact with dragons and talk with them, and there's a ton of different things that can come up, and it's all I want to say circumstantial, but what I mean by that is like you just, especially at the first, you just don't know what can happen. And it really, at least coming from a experience where I don't have a lot of experience in the Slavic mythology, literally it seems like anything can happen. Like I don't know how these creatures work. Like there's one really interesting one right here actually, where at the bridge there's this spirit that's like part of the building, and it like won't let you go past, and suddenly I'm like teleported to another location. Like just crazy stuff can happen. It's really, really crazy. Or maybe you come across some fairies, and it's like, well, do you try to hide from them, or do you run, or do you talk to them? And they might do something where it's either negative, or they might even give you some magical cape. And so there's just all sorts of different things that you can do, and experience. And it's just so lore heavy. I mean, every single thing, each of these, even this, is 2 cards full of kind of information based off of, the warrior. And it's all about, the warrior's named as Nameless. And it's all about him learning his name and what that means and where he comes from, what he can do. And, so it's impressive, the amount of lore that's in this game. It's a lot. And it's just a really good read. Like I could just sit down and read this, just all the different mythological beings that I have never even heard of. Like I'd never heard of Amora, but I don't ever want to experience that either. So we'll get more into maybe what she does later. But suffice it to say, super lore heavy. I mean, like everything about this is all about glorifying the lore behind this, with a big respect. And this book in particular talks about, how, well, I guess actually it's not that. It'll be in the rule book for you guys, but there's character stories for each person. This right here was really cool. So this is the locations of the Forest of Radgost. And what it does is it actually tells you, which parts are actually like a legit part of the mythology and which are for the game, right? And then it even says like, okay, so let's say this ring here is from the mythology itself, right? It'll say, here's what it is in the game and here's what it is in mythology. And it'll tell you that. It'll tell you about the mythology and how that meant that, or what it meant by bridges, or even crossroads, which is super cool. And again, it just goes into so much detail about it all that I feel like I'm a little bit more educated, which God knows I need that. So that was actually pretty cool. I liked it. All right, the last thing I want to say before I get into my first negative is just how pretty the art is. I love the art of this game, from the characters of the children and how they look, to the board itself, to even like your bag and all that. These are obviously temporary cards, but I've seen the actual cards and what they'll look like, and they look so pretty. It's going to be a very pretty game. You're going to see that on the Kickstarter, which, by the way, there is a link down below. So if this game looks interesting to you, or if you want to learn more about it, there'll be a link in the description to go ahead and visit that. So you'll be able to see what the final art will look like on a lot of this stuff. Like the enemies are just kind of like, I got these like Jenga pieces with paper. Like, this is just a prototype, obviously. So, don't judge the book by its cover. That being said, the cover is already very pretty. Especially, like I said, this board and the color and the vibrance and the slight cartoonishness of it all, but then also the seriousness involved in it. It just really, really cool there. Now, that actually leads me to one of my first negatives is, while the art is pretty, it's at a detriment to maybe the the size of everything. Now, this is a prototype, so this could change, but as of now, as you can see, I am decked out fully where I don't have any more space. Right now, these cards are actually on the board because I don't have enough with 3 people set up here on my board. Putting it long ways, so sideways, it wouldn't even work at all, right? Because these people couldn't even play. But with just 3 people here having all that, I could barely fit this in here. I could fit this paper here, and then all the decks and stuff would have to go way over there, and those people would have to kind of deal with it. Additionally, like if I was to move over here, I have to reach this far just to grab my guy from the village and start moving him. It's huge. And I've seen this problem in prototypes before, and it doesn't propagate to the final thing. So obviously this is not a final review, but this is just reviewing where it is right now. Where it is right now, I feel like it needs to shrink down a little bit. And part of it's just, the extra space on the board itself, right? Because you got all the pretty and niceties and all that. I'm playing Bloodborne at the same time, and it takes up half the space for the map, and that's once you've explored pretty much the whole map. So double the size of Bloodborne, and then you get like these like bags and stuff like that, and they're this big, and you get 2 of them, right? Because you have your abilities and stuff like that here, or your companions, and then you have your other items and stuff. Part of it is the size of the cards. I feel maybe those could be smaller. You can fit 7 cards on this bag. Speaking of which, the bag's really cool too. I didn't mention that, but you can like lose the bag, and then you can come across somebody else's bag and like change stuff and swap stuff out in there and put stuff in there or take stuff out, and all sorts of cool stuff there. But it takes up a lot of room. This is essentially your player board is this big, and that just seems really big to me. And part of it again is just because of that theme. Like this could be smaller if you got rid of her little cool story blurb here, but it's cool. I get that. But you could shave that off instantly, right? And then the other thing is just, I think, the size of the cards, making that perhaps a bit less wide so that they don't have as much, or putting them tighter. As you can see, there's plenty of space here between, these 2, right? This gets packed pretty close, which again, I think smaller cards might help a little bit there. But, this game takes up a lot of space. Quick to set up, but it is overstuffed with just spacing. And I would almost view a lot of this as like white space, right? So if you talk about like a document, especially when you're talking about like a technical document, like a rule book or something like that, you go through and you notice the white space. In other words, how much it's not like filling up or anything like that. So yeah, just really, really big. All right, now this is something I really wanted to kind of talk about because I can see you guys already wondering this, especially most of my viewers, and that's this random die. So this is roll to move. This is roll to move, and not only that, but it's roll to move and you don't even know where you're going. That could be frustrating, right? Especially with something like the healer who only moves on a D6. You can also move on a D10. There are things like you could get the speed of a rabbit. Don't ask how you get that. I won't tell you, but you can get that a certain way, and that allows you to roll on a 20, a D20, so you can really sprint, but just briefly. Here's the thing about that. This actually works in this game. First of all, it's thematic, of course. But while the goal is to get the children, it's not a race to get the children. Because you can get very good benefits from interactions too. It's not always a bad thing to interact with something. It can be bad, it can be devastating, or it could be good and pleasant, and you could actually get a really cool thing. And so it's more just the journey, I guess, if that makes sense. You're not playing this game to min-max your route to the children and then back to the village and get done in 20 minutes if you can. You can do that, but you actually won't progress and see everything at all, right? I mean, the whole point of this is to go through this book and encounter everything. And not only that, but to lose against the giants and win against the giants and win against them by hiding and win against them by that and this. And that's really the point of it. So this actually was not a bother. It works. It's not like Clue or something like that, or even Sorry, where you just get frustrated with, I rolled a 1 again. Or, I mean, that can be a bummer, if you roll really low, just because it's like I roll 2s quite often in mine, and so I wouldn't do an encounter. But when you don't have an encounter, you can still search the forest and get some items, at least until you're full. And ideally, you don't fill up enough, you don't roll low enough to where you're full and then still rolling low. So ideally, you're still kind of moving around and interacting, but and you can choose your direction. So you could turn around or, whatever. And then the left and right is according to your character, not necessarily you sitting there. But, yeah, those actually work out pretty darn well. I was pretty happy with it. Now, there is another positive that I really like about this, just overall, just conceptually, it's simple. If you guys know me, I'm simple. No, if you guys know me, it's that I don't like 100 mechanics and you've thrown in literally the kitchen sink and all of that kind of stuff. I guess a good example of that is like Shadows of Brimstone, where if you throw a TNT, you actually have a mechanic around the physics of it bouncing around. Once you get to that level where you're like, oh, if it's raining, then this happens. And if you're left-handed, then this happens. And if you woke up on the wrong side of the bed, this happens. And if it's a Tuesday, then this. Like, I don't want that amount of rules. That's not my style. Some people might enjoy that and might enjoy being left-handed on a Tuesday while it's raining, and the fact that there is a rule in the rule book for that. If that's the case, you can go to, Kingdom of the Monster, you can go to Shadows of Brimstone. There are games like that. That's not this. This is closer to something like Blood Rage or something like that, and I'm just using Blood Rage as an example because I know a lot of you have probably played it, where I explained it very quickly, right? It's not that complex. It's a very simple system, and then how those systems interact is where the complexity happens, not from just having a whole bunch or having very advanced mechanics. It's the interaction between them, and I always appreciate that. So anytime I see a game that's simple but nuanced, I'll call that out, and I'll call that out here. I think it's a positive for me in my style anyway. Now, with that simplicity comes a negative, and that's that there's not a lot of strategy, which is okay for the kind of game it's trying to be, but it's not my preference. So, as I said, your goal is not, okay, how can we min-max our way over here, right? You could do that, but you're going to be left wanting. If that's your goal, is to just win the game, then you're not going to have a lot of fun with it. Just because it's pretty easy to do. You could clear a path and go as a group, and then you just go through, you get them, and then you go back. Especially if you get some buffs. Like there's, one here. Don't know if I have it or not, but there's, oh yeah, right here. So, no, that's not that, but anyway, there's an ability that you get. Maybe it wasn't even a red card. I don't remember. Maybe it was a blue? No, it wasn't a blue. There's one where you essentially can become like a wolf. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to move faster if you were moving slower, and you never have to roll this again. You can now go wherever you choose. And as long as you have somebody like that, they can clear a path, they can do stuff, you can really make it efficient, especially because this works based off of successful encounters. You could, if you wanted to, avoid going into the night by just not successfully encountering. You're always trying to lose. Now, that's a weird way to do it, and that you might not like some of the outcomes, but you can certainly do that. Or skip. There are options to skip. For instance, this right here is a fairies cap, which allows you to pass 3 creatures without being noticed. So you can do that, and you can hide from them, hopefully, too. I have right here, I have a magic potion. There is a witch's cane that I might be able to turn into a tree. Now, that's hilarious, first of all. But it allows me to successfully hide, because guess what? I was a tree. I'll blend right into the forest. It goes to show how crazy this game is. But also, it's just, that's not how you want to play that. At first I was looking at it like that, but over time, I just started to have kind of fun with the story and with the people I was playing with and interacting with it and talking about how something happened or not. And that's really where the enjoyment comes from there. If that's not your style, then this game probably isn't for you. But if you're okay with that, then I guess watch on and we'll discuss. The closest I could compare it to is Etherfields, where it's not mechanically strong. It's not something that you're going to, think about different strategies. You're just wanting to experience the world and the story. And that's really what this is. All right, let's talk about personal stories here. These are interesting. So these are really hard. When I talked about simplicity and I talked about strategy and stuff, this is probably the antithesis to this. It's still not like insanely big, but for instance, this one might have you go and try to find a certain encounter. And then you have to successfully encounter it in a certain way. And then you have to then that creature will follow you and you have to go with that creature to a certain location. And then you have to actually spend the night there. So you actually have to go through like the night and do that. And spending the night there and then coming back will do something to you or, somehow affect that story, your personal story or your personal mission. And doing that can be kind of hard, right? You don't know necessarily where they are, right? So you got to go find that encounter. Then once you do, then you have to be the one to interact with it and not somebody else, because somebody else does it, then it's off the board again. Like it can be hard to do, and that's on purpose. It's on purpose because a lot of these actually add permanent, forever, even when you play the game again, changes to your characters. So I talk about roguelike experiences a few times in a few videos. Townsfolk Tussle was the latest one I saw that did that, where you could, if you did certain things, if you did really well in like a boss fight, you could make it to where every future game has different items or has a change on how a character acts or something like that, an alternative setup to them. You're unlocking things permanently and kind of like a meta campaign. They're not related, but things you did a month ago in the game can actually affect your game now. This does the same thing. So these personal missions are not semi-co-op, right? They're not the kind where it's like, oh, I have my own objective and I'm gonna like not find the children. It's not that at all. It's really just you learning about the characters and then also changing the characters for future games. And they all get kind of different buffs and different changes like that, which again is actually quite cool. And there are like kind of an ability system there where like, maybe somebody can go and like actually find out what's ahead of them so they can actually know what the encounter is and then make a decision based off that. So you make a better decision. But, yeah, that's a very cool part. And it's actually the hardest part, definitely the meatiest part of this game are those personal missions. So if you're one to where you want a little bit more of a meaty experience, you're not going to want to play without them. You're going to want those in. In fact, I would argue the rule book suggests otherwise, but if you're more of a power gamer and a little bit more into the mechanics, like I typically am, you're going to want those, game one. Just to kind of experience that and at least have that option so you see that complexity and then maybe even try to figure out, okay, how would I go about doing this? Yeah, but that's super cool. All right. Now, as you guys know, I have 4 children. So we have a family of 6 here. And so I don't know if you've noticed, but I cover some games that maybe kids will like. This was one of them. My kids liked this. They liked the look of it. With the roll movie, it's kind of like a Candyland kind of experience anyway, right? And so it's just a very kind of thing where you roll and you see how far you go and then you interact with, oh no, that happened to me and all that kind of stuff. It's actually, it's pretty special to play with kids. It's a lot more fun, I think, because when kids react, they're always a little bit different than maybe how we react to things. They're a little bit more animated, they're a little bit more into it. And so out of everybody playing, like my daughter, who's kind of our main little gamer, was I think into this game more than even me. Like she was invested fully in what was going on and how to get these kids to safety, which was, I think, actually pretty cool. Now, with that, there is a note here. This is not a positive or a negative, but it is something I want you guys to be aware of. If you're buying this for your kids, there is talk of suicide. There's talk of murderers. There's talk of suffocating people in their sleep until they die. It's like Slavic mythology, and so it's not our fairy tales. Right? It's their fairy tales, which are a little different, a little bit darker. It's not done in like a gross way, or or a graphic way or anything like that. My daughter's 11. I was able to read to her comfortably like that. And it was fine. But it all depends on your kid, right? If you've never even mentioned, or they don't even maybe even know what suicide is, and suddenly you're talking about, how people may commit suicide after dealing with something, then that might spark a question. And maybe that's something you want to have a conversation with. Maybe you can, as things come up in a kind of a more safer setting, you can do that. I don't know. It's just something to note because it looks extremely kid friendly, and it depends on how comfortable you are with that kind of stuff with your kids. So I would not play this with my 6-year-old, just because, first of all, she wouldn't understand that kind of stuff anyway, and it'd be hard to kind of maybe explain why somebody would do something, or I don't know. I just feel like they don't need to hear about how people are being crushed to death and then suffocating where they can't breathe and they die in their sleep. Just not gonna say that, right? Like she can go watch cartoons. That's fine by me. She doesn't need to quite experience that yet. Maybe it's 7. No, but you get what I'm saying. So just a note there. Kids love it. Just make sure your kids are ready for it. All right. One thing I'd like to note, I kind of mentioned it earlier, a little early, and I apologize for that. It's a good example, but, this game is highly thematic. I kind of talked about the art, but the art and I think theme are different. And art is just something visual and that's it. Whether it's a card UI design or whether it's, the board art or your character miniature or whatever, right? The theme is something you actually feel. It should be integrated into the game, to where it's just the experience that it gives you, right? So a theme can be dark, but it's not based off the art per se. It's based off of what's happening and what you're doing. Or it can be lighthearted and, but the art could still be whatever. It could be on Mars. You could be on Earth. Like the art and theme are slightly separate like that, if that makes sense. So the thematic part here is really the kind of thing where it's like, I encountered a giant and tried to fight it. He picked me up and now he's carrying me over somewhere and now I'm trapped. And maybe somebody can go and try and save me, or maybe I can try to escape. Or maybe I'm just walking around being carried by this giant everywhere and I'm just moving all around the board. Or I talked about how I try to interact with the spirit ghost thing that's inside of the building, and it did not go well for me, and suddenly I just fell unconscious and I woke back up on a different part of the map. And it was a very specific part of the map too, based off of, again, some mythological stuff, but either way, that kind of stuff is what's happening to you or what you're doing, right? It's not just, it's not just reading a story. Oh, I encountered some fairies and they gave me this gift and because I chose this and we all lived happily ever after. It's, literally teleporting, waking up in a strange place, or being moved around by a giant, or encountering a dragon, or even a fox, and maybe the fox stole something from you and so you have to drop your items there. It's integrated into the actual mechanics, or at least the mechanics that are there, and I think that's actually really well done. It's just something that you feel. This game feels like it looks, if that makes sense, and it doesn't have to. That's actually the harder part to do, I feel, but it does it well. Okay, so I'm gonna capstone just with those crazy situations, like I said, and I'm not gonna tell you all of them. I'm just spoiling just the top of the barrel there, right? There's a lot of more to experience there. And then that replay value, especially through either personal missions or just through experiencing it all. Like if you've experienced this, wait until you experience this one, or wait until you get a hedgehog, or wait until you figure out why there's a golden egg, or wait until you actually interact with Radgost, or any number of things like that. So again, if your mission and your goal in this is to experience it, then there's a lot actually here. You see all of these decks. All of these decks are thematic, and all these decks add different things. They're different items. They're different companions. There's different situations. There's different buffs and debuffs, and then in here, you have just lists and lists of. Oh, by the way, they have already some art in here that looks great. By the way, of what could happen if you try and talk to him and fail, or if you try and talk to him and he does good, or it's at night and you come across this guy. And so that's really, I think, where a lot of the joy comes from. Now, to finalize this whole video, is this my game? No, it is not. You guys know what I like. I like fighting and zombies and Vikings and bloodshed and combat, and I like cool stuff, right? Like if I could ride on a bear and punch a troll in the face, that sounds awesome. If I could do a headbutt in any game, I think headbutts are awesome. You're automatically cool for doing a headbutt as a move. So that's my style. This is not that. But I can see where the appreciation would come from if you can appreciate interacting with this. And I did have fun playing with my kids on this. And in fact, once we really got into kind of just enjoying the story and, experiencing that, it did elevate it a lot. So not a bad game at all, just maybe a style that I don't necessarily prefer, but perhaps you do. Again, there is a link down below. You can experience a lot more of that down there. I'm sure they'll show you some of the fancy cards. They'll show you some good examples, I imagine, and you can see like the price of it and all that stuff. A very, very unique game, and I appreciate the lore. I'm going to continue actually reading this, whether I play or not, because it's just interesting to learn more about this, because I'm just so unaware of it all. But anyway, that's it for me. That's my review of Forest of Radgost. Let me know what you think, if this is something you'd be interested in, or if you think there's a cool part to it that maybe I didn't touch on. I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll be back here real soon with another review, this time for Bloodborne, so I hope you appreciate that. And with that, I'll let you go. Take care.